preparing to stream.
But we don't have yet Michael.
No, but he's second. So and Ivan is first, but he has a tendency of joining the stream. Okay, and now I'm hearing my own echo again.
Yeah, but okay, let me just write down
We have the questions first, first half hour.
Exactly, so Ivan still has 30 minutes.
Sorry. Yeah, he'll probably join at 25 past the hour.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, also because there is a question for Michael by Ivana, I think, or Romana, because she has problems with RP card.
Oh, okay. Yes, and there was a question from her as well in the notebooks, but that was also not quite. That was also related to RP card.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Oh, you're earlier than I expected, Ivan.
Good morning.
Well, or...
Sorry?
Because yesterday I noticed there was quite a bit of a delay. Because I was speaking at the same time as Jack, actually, after his talk. So I hope I'm at home now because it was raining heavily yesterday, and
okay.
I just hope there's no much delay when I speak, when I give the lecture, because otherwise, wow.
To me, your sound is great.
Tell me, Jack.
It's probably because I'm coming from South Africa, though. It's probably me that has the delay rather than you.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
It could be. Or a combination of both. Because I noticed that you were speaking and I was speaking. I saw you, but I didn't hear you. So I heard you afterwards. So it was something strange.
Yeah, it's most likely South Africa. I have it whenever I have meetings with Europeans as well. And it's just like, I'm talking and then randomly someone will cut in, which apparently they were speaking 10 seconds ago. So the issue is like, I think if I remember rightly, South Africa only has one internet connection to Europe because someone, a ship managed to dig up one of the lines.
Wow.
So you can't get any fast connection to Europe at the moment.
Can't you plug into the hard-to-based hook? Fiber.
Well, I might be able to. I may have applied for a job there, so that could be in the future.
How did Mi Casas to Casa? How did that go?
We had quite a few participants, and I must say personally, I really enjoyed it. Just being outside for a bit, and it was harsh to switch back to actually sitting behind the screen and participating in discussions, but there were a few diehards yesterday who participated as well. So I haven't checked this morning yet what the status is of the number of steps, but we got a fair ways from Maastricht all the way in the south to Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and I've got a few people who walked or biked who didn't want to use or couldn't use the world walking infrastructure. So I'll add them to the total today.
Okay, so I see people are coming in. We have 15 attendees. Good morning to everybody, if you just joined. So this is already the 4th day of the CASA-VLBI workshop. Time is really flying fast. So we will start now the first 30 minutes with the questions that remain from the last few days. I already see something in the Q&A box. Thank you for being so fast. So Summit is asking how much signal to noise is required to try self-calibration and especially amplitude self-calibration.
That's a very good question.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Let's see if, yeah, so Javier is not here.
And Christine is also not here yet.
Yeah.
Jaco, Benito, they're also very
yeah, maybe I can answer that one. So, well, as always, you don't have a strict limit that you can set. So also depends on how good are your solutions from the beginning, or how, yeah. close to the good ones are. But the thumbs rule typically is like you should have at least a signal to noise of 10 at least, and hopefully something closer to 50, 100 to be completely sure that self-calibration is not putting artificial flags from the noise into your source. Especially in amplitude, it must, I would say that almost in all cases should be larger than signal to noise of 10. That's sometimes a bit relatively easy to check because you can run amplitude self-calibration and then compare the flags that you are getting in the source. So in several cases, you may see a significant typical increase of the flags source from before to after self-calibration. So that typically means that you are getting artificial noise. So what happens is that you have a lot of flags in your field, which is the positive and negative, is just the noise that you have there. And what self-calibration is doing is basically taking those positive flags and put it into the source. So of course, it always helps to check what happened before and after. Is the fluxes are relatively constant. That's a good signal always. And yeah, for sure, you cannot do self-calibration amplitude if it's a signal to noise less than 20, than 10. And I will say it's even larger than those values. Basis is always a bit more stable. So you can check, but even in those cases, yeah, should be larger than 10 in the practical case. 100 to be sure that everything should work fine.
I add as well a little bit on too. That's all right. I don't know if I've got a delay.
Yes.
Sorry?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so the other thing as well with self-colors, it also depends on the telescopes in your array. So if you really wanted to do a technical kind of assessment of what the signal to noise is based upon your source, you can always look at the baseline sensitivity. So what is baseline to baseline? So for example, with the VLBA, you probably need a slightly higher signal to noise than you would do with the EVN because it comprises of 25 to 25 million baselines. Meanwhile, maybe with the EVN, you could go down to, as Benito says, 10 signals to noise because you have the Effelsberg Jodrell bank baselines, which effectively can bootstrap the solutions to all the other telescopes and get good enough signal to noise solutions anyway. So yeah, that's kind of at least the way that we did it for the multi-source self-cal to work out what is the right, when you can do it and when you can't do it.
Another thing that actually sometimes is done, and I'm not completely sure in CASA if that's possible or how, well, yeah, it's possible, but I will need to check. It's like you can do self-calibration, but only in a subset of your antennas. So you will have higher signal to noise on the most sensitive baselines. So maybe those are the only ones that you want to self-calibrate because they will still provide a more accurate calibration, but maybe you cannot trust the results that you have on the less sensitive baselines. So what you can actually do is just taking, like in that case, the ones to Effelsberg and only the strongest, the most sensitive baselines and self-calibrate in those ones. So based on the solutions that you get, you can see if the solutions are meaningful, not, and then apply them only to a subset of your array.
Okay, thank you, Benito. Thank you, Jack. I wrote, I tried to summarize your replies in the Mattermost. Please edit it if you think I missed something out. So then there is a second question by D. Ven. How can one compare the quality of two models used for self-cal quantitatively? Oh, it's too early for me. Can you, one of you, take this question as well?
I can start. I'm sure there's plenty to add on. So at least personally, I think probably the best way for me is to first check your models that you image. So just go and have a look at your model image that you make that you're going to use for self-cal, because that can tell you a lot about whether your model has thrown in noise. So if you've cleaned too deeply, you're going to get noise spikes into that model, and that will be adverse to getting good self-calibration solutions. And then I guess the second way which you could do it is to also, if your source is bright enough and you can see it in the visibilities, is to plot in plot MS, say UV distance versus amplitude, and then overplot the model column in there. So there's an option in plot MS where you can add another axis and plot the model column, and then you can see how well that fits kind of to the shape of the visibilities as they are. So that's kind of, at least for me, that would be the way that I would do it. I don't know if anyone else has other ways which are probably much better.
I think that's the thing, like you can maybe get the divided what your visibility is minus the model or source, but basically, or comparing the ratios between both of them. So basically, yeah, looking at the differences between your model and where your visibilities are. So everything should be close to 1 in that case.
Benito, could you, because you can do 2 different plots, right, in plot MS. So you could charge both of them in 2 different plots so you can see them next to each other.
Yeah, or even the ratios. I think you can do data.
2 different ratios with different
or data minus model or data, yeah, over model. I think you can do also that.
Yeah.
So I think those ones may be more relevant to see. But yeah, otherwise you put both of things at the same time.
No, I just meant that if you have 2 models, then you need to have probably,
okay, yeah.
You have maybe 2 measurement sets with the model inside, or 2 different model tables.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this answer.
I think that maybe another thing to look at is actually the distribution or the time evolution of the gain solutions, because if we are actually solving the real gains, there should be some memory between the gains at close by times. Okay, so there should be some smoothness in the gains. Whereas if you are fitting noise and you are actually producing a spurious flux from noise, the gains should reproduce the inverse of that noise. So they should be noisy. Okay, so if you look in plotcal, or the equivalent that we may have in CASA-6, the time evolution of the phase gains, you should see that they are systematic. Okay, so there is some, let's say, memory. Okay, so because the atmosphere is not changing that fast, especially at centimeter wavelengths. Okay, so we should see that solutions at close by times are similar. That will be another test that we could maybe suggest to do.
And actually the same in frequency. Like if you run self-calibration that provides a solution per spectral window, you do expect all the solutions to be roughly the same at all spectral windows, especially for phases. So the evolution of the phases, the corrections that you're applying there should be roughly the same in all your band, because at the end, at gigahertz frequencies, the evolution doesn't change that much in our limited bandwidth. So that's a good actually test that you can always do. Like plot the solutions that you're getting per spectral window and check that all of them look similar. Otherwise, you are kind of fitting noise there.
Except when there's RFI in one of the bands.
Yeah.
But hopefully when you're doing self-calibration, you have already gone through the standard calibration and you would have flagged
Exactly.
the RFI already, because that you should have already passed the step to inspect your UV data and the standard calibration.
Yes, but there are cases where if, for example, you run AC core with the RFI still in the band, it will adjust the amplitude to be the average, including the RFI. And then if you then flag the RFI, then the amplitude will be off.
Okay, so in this case, you need to save your flags, wipe your whole data set, import it new, apply first the flags, and then start AC core.
Maybe. It is not entirely clear what the best approach there is.
So typically when I don't know what to do anymore, what I did to the data set, since you have a script, you can cancel the corrected data column and start anew. And in that, CASA is much cleaner than APES. Okay, so then there is another question that came this morning. In general, how are progress on line observations processing going? Are all standard procedures already available? So this, I guess, refers to the CASA calibration pipeline, because mostly it was presented on continuum data.
I can take that because I'm working on this actually together with Olga. So all the functionality is in principle there. There is an opportunity in the fringe fitter nowadays that allows you to fringe fit on a single channel. And maybe Des can comment on that a little bit further. But we do not yet guarantee that it actually gives you sensible results. So it works, we've been verifying it, the basic functionality is there. But I would welcome anybody who has experience in this to start actually trying this and see if they get sensible results to comparisons with previous data sets in APES, and let us know what problems they encounter. Des, go ahead.
I don't have much to add to what Elsa said. The implementation in principle handles it, and we've run it and it does give answers, but we really need somebody who is expert at CASA and also expert at spectral line observations to put it through its paces and tell us if it really is satisfactory. So
you have also the MS transform task running correctly?
Well, if you're talking about CVAL,
yes, but
which is another of these front end simple wrappers around MS transform. There's different schools of people how they want to apply CVAL. Some of them work in CASA, some of them we aren't 100% sure of whether they do what people want. But the problem is different people want different things from CVAL.
Okay, yeah, maybe this can be, or after this meeting addressed, since most of the spectral line observations, most of the people that do that, they also want to use CVAL, especially those that do astrometry. So I guess that when people might contact Ilse to interact for the testing of spectral line data in the pipeline, CASA pipeline, that maybe also this can be included.
Yeah, and any feedback is very welcome.
I don't know if Michael wants to add something about RP-Card and the future developments towards spectral line observations, if he's here.
Yes, I'm here. I mean, sorry. Camera on this laptop is horrible because it's in the bottom left, so you always see me from the bottom. Sorry about that. Yes, sure. I'm actually also very interested in this. I had the same problem with MS Transform / CVAL that I'm not a spectral line expert, but I tried to get some Doppler correction through that task and it didn't quite work. So I essentially stopped there. But once all the tools are in place, I'll definitely upgrade the pipeline and also add a spectral line mode. Thanks for asking, Kazi.
Well, it's very nice to have a number of pipelines that we know how they work, and also to know that people is working on that. So let me see if there is. So we have no other questions in the Q&A box, but I'm sure that maybe yesterday in the afternoon in the hands-on sessions?
There is an interesting discussion ongoing in channel E, data processing. There's a question by S. Ravani about a plot that she shows about the fringe fitting results after the instrumental delay. And I'm still trying to get to the bottom of what exactly she's showing here. So from what I understand, the plot shows the corrected phases after instrumental delay calibration, but they are on average around 0. Thanks.
I'm sharing the screen. Yeah. So are you talking about this?
This is the one, yes.
Okay, very good.
So
I have an opinion about that. Did you forget
have an opinion? Okay, go ahead.
Did you forget to turn parallactic angle on? Because that looks very like what happens when you do that.
Exactly.
That's symmetric around 0.
Yes. Yeah, so what you would expect is all the phases to be actually around 0. So there's offsets here. And you can see the purple and black line are a nice example of this. They are probably the 2 polarizations of 2 different telescopes. So the purple ones are 1 telescope and the black ones are 1 telescope. And you see the RR and LL are symmetrically offset around 0. And this is usually what you get if you forget your parallactic angle correction. You can also see in this case that spectral window 7, the last one, has some weird behavior. So there may not have been a solution there, and she actually shows that in the fringe fitter output in the logger, it also tells her that there was no solution found for that particular spectral window.
And so the data looks excellent. So you
otherwise,
my guess would be that the reference station for some reason doesn't have that, or it's been flagged.
Would that still give? Would that kill the fringe fitter if there's no reference station at all?
Yeah. So, and it won't find a solution if you don't have a reference station. It can't find a solution.
Mm-hmm. But does the fringe fitter complete satisfactorily if it's not? Because I've always seen that it completely crashes. It gives you an error warning and then it stops, and there's no calibration table if there's no reference station in some of the data.
No. The reference station is there in all the other subbands, so it works fine.
Yeah.
It's not there, so it won't find a solution.
Oh, the reference, what could happen that the reference antenna itself has no spectral window 7?
That's what I mean.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah.
Because if there was, there should be a line at 0 for. No, that's not true. Sorry, take that back.
But I mean, the trivial thing to do is just try another reference station. It looks like all of the data is good enough that you should be able to try that.
Yeah.
And turn parallactic angle correction on.
Yes, and maybe for the end to avoid really noisy imaging, also the spectral window edge channels flagging. So
yeah,
it looks like there is some noise in between the spectral windows still that could get messy in your images.
Yeah, what do we recommend these days? 2 or 3 channels at the edges you flag?
Yeah, roughly 10% on either side. So if you have 32 channels in the band, it's 3 on either side.
And you would do that with this squawk?
No, that is the time-based flagging. So what I do is the flag data, and there's a nice example in the notebook of how you can do this with the spectral windows. You select all spectral windows and then just the channels on either side.
Yes, okay, indeed. Did some of the tutors encounter other interesting discussions, which they might maybe want to repeat for the people who weren't there yesterday?
Let's see, there's still some stuff ongoing. I'm trying to remember what we did yesterday. It feels like so many things have happened.
Yeah, so earlier you were telling me that there was a large discussion on the ionospheric calibration, the Decker maps.
Yes, that is. I think that is all very well traceable in Mattermost at the moment. What is slightly less? Sorry.
In which channel?
That's a good question. I wrote that down yesterday. Channel D. Data processing D.
Okay, that makes sense. That was the one of yesterday morning.
Yeah. There was also some discussion about the use of calibration libraries instead of gain tables, and I'm still half confused because I got that completely wrong. But it is a very interesting strategy to use the calibration libraries instead of the gain tables that we've been demonstrating you in these lectures. And Javier is unfortunately not here, but he gave a very good explanation yesterday. And I think, actually, I'm pretty sure I put the link that he shared on the wiki page for people to read through on how they could use this. And he was quite enthusiastic about this. So it's also something that I will try myself, see how that works. But the question was not really answered in the Mattermost chat. So if people are interested in this, check out the wiki link.
Okay, thank you, Ilse. So if no, are there other questions or comments that somebody would like to make? Please type them in the Q&A or in the chat. If not, then I'd say let's take a 5-minute leave of the screen for making a second cup of coffee or tea or something like that, because we are going to have some very nice lectures coming up in just 6 minutes. The first one about polarization calibration.
Yeah, Ivan, if you want to start sharing your screen, we can set this up for people that they know they're in the right place.
Yeah. I'm going to make tea.
And I'm going to make coffee.
Okay, I'm going to share the screen then. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, that looks good. Now presentation.
Well, and what is more important, if I change the screen now, have you seen the change?
Yes.
At the same time as I spoke. Yeah, because yesterday I noticed there was a huge delay. So I'm sorry about that, because I just started speaking at the same time as other speakers, and it was a bit of a.
It was a couple. Yeah, it was like a fraction of a second. I didn't find it too disturbing, but it worked fine for me. What was more interesting yesterday was during Javier's presentation, his mouse pointer was not always pointing at the point where he thought he was pointing. And that I can't really explain why that would be different.
Let me increase the volume a bit. Yeah. Okay, so I wait then till 9:30. Do you hear me? Oops.
Yes, we hear you.
Okay.
Ivan, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. So I'm not sure if you've seen, but in the chat, someone asked if the slides are on the wiki.
The slides for this lecture. No, I just finished them a couple of minutes ago.
Okay.
I didn't have time to upload them, but I will as soon as I finish.
Okay, great.
If you have a Dropbox link, Ivan, I can put them on right away.
Yes, let's do it then. Let's do it. Dropbox, public. I send you the link. Come on. Compartir.
Okay, so I think we are approaching 8:30 UT. I see, Ivan, that you are not sharing your screen anymore.
Yeah, I will.
Okay. Okay, so the webinar is being recorded. So I'm glad to announce the first talk of the morning. Ivan Martí Vidal from the University of Valencia will talk to us about the polarization calibration in CASA.
Yes.
Please start.
I'm gonna share the screen. Okay.
Oh, excellent, thank you.
Okay, yeah, fantastic. So let's start. Hi, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon or whatever. So let's start about polarization calibration in VLBI. Okay, which, as you will see, has some peculiarities. Okay, that make it especially troublesome sometimes. Okay, but yeah, hopefully we will. Sorry, it's very early in the morning here. I spent a very bad night yesterday. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. Some basic concepts. Okay. So I think that the most important concept to understand polarimetry in interferometry and in VLBI in particular is what we call the instrumental polarization, okay? Because in our data, we have the combination of two things, well, as always, but in polarimetry, it's especially troublesome. You will see why. The case of the instrumental polarization, which is modeled by the D terms, okay? So when you have a radio telescope, basically you have to split the signal that comes from the sky into two orthogonal polarizations, okay? And the way you do it depends on the technology of your antenna, okay? You can use orthomode transducers at lower frequencies. You can use some high-tech stuff at very high frequencies like reflection gratings and so on, okay? So depending on the frequency and the technology of your antenna, you have very different approaches. You also have to convert polarizations in different ways. For instance, in VLBI, you convert into circular using quarter wave plates, or you can also use software. That's the case of pole convert, okay? The point is that none of these technologies, none of these devices is perfect, okay? So signals from one polarization are usually leaked into the other. By leaking, I mean that the right circular polarization that you record in your backend is not pure right. It has a little bit of left circular polarization and the other way around. And this leaked signal has a given amplitude and also have a given phase, okay? Because if you have a feedback in your backend, for instance, then the signal that is being leaked from one polarization to the other has some delay, okay? Which you see as a phase, okay? So indeed, what you have is like a complex. And by complex, I mean mathematically complex with an amplitude and a phase, okay? Combination of different polarization channels, okay? The way we model this leakage is using a quantity that depends on each antenna and each polarizer, quantity that we call D term, okay? So D term is the amplitude, gives us the amplitude and the phase of the signal that is being leaked from one polarization channel, okay, into the other polarization channel, okay? So that's the thing we want to model. We want to fit with our calibration approaches in order to apply it before we build the full polarization image, because otherwise our polarization images will be fully corrupted by the instrumental effects, okay? So in order to understand how we perform this polarimetry calibration, we need to understand well, it's better to understand the measurement equation formalism, okay, which you already saw yesterday a couple of times. Okay, so basically this is what relates what we call the visibility matrix, which is a funny combination of the brightness distribution of the 4 Stokes parameters of your source, I, Q, U, and V. This is the oh, sorry, that's the other way around. So this is the visibility matrix. That means the correlation of the different polarization products among antennas. And this is what we call the brightness matrix, which gives us this funny combination of Stokes parameters of your source. We will see. We will see it in more detail in a few slides. And these J's here are the Jones matrices, okay, of the 2 antennas, which encode the information of all the gain and instrumental polarization of your instrument. Okay, so you can actually compare this equation to the classical interferometer equation, where instead of having matrices, we have scalars. Okay, so instead of having Jones matrices, we have just numbers. Okay, complex numbers that give us the gains of the antennas. Okay, in this case, we only care about the total intensity, or what we call a Stokes I. Okay, so the jump from a Stokes I to the full Stokes formalism is basically a jump from the classical interferometer equation into the radio interferometer measurement equation. Okay, so you just change the scalars by matrices. One of these matrices, which is particularly important for us, is what we call the parallactic angle rotation. Okay, so here you see an animation that tries to explain what is parallactic angle. So when you observe, for instance, with an antenna that has an alt azimuthal mount, the orientation of this that you see on the sky would correspond to the white box here, okay, which is always vertical and horizontal, okay, because of the mount of the antenna. Whereas the orientation of the source, as it is seen by the antenna, would follow the green line here, okay, so because the sky is rotating. So in the end, what you have is that the 2 frames, the frame of your receiver and the frame of your source, what we call the receiver frame and the sky frame, they are rotated by a time variable quantity that we call parallactic angle, okay? So depending on the polarization basis of your observations, if you have linear polarization feeds or circular polarization feeds, you have different equations, or different shape for the same operator, okay, which is the parallactic angle rotation. Okay, so in VLBI, it's good to apply it before the phase and any delay rate calibration, so before the fringe fitting, because otherwise your fringe fitting solutions will be contaminated by the time evolution of the parallactic angle. Okay, and then you will mix apples to oranges, let's say. Okay, so it's before to apply it, well before the fringe fitting. It's not problem because it's deterministic, so you can apply it with no problem as long as you have circular polarizers. Okay, which is one of the reasons why we use circular polarizers in VLBI. So one detail that we should not forget, it's not important for VLBI because of the use of circular polarizers, but it's critical in the more general case, is that in the measurement equation, when we give the visibility matrix, we usually give it in the receiver frame. Okay, so these are measured at the back end of from the correlations entering the back end of the antenna, and hence this is measured in the receiver frame. Okay, whereas the brightness matrix is usually given in the sky frame. Okay, because the Stokes parameters reflect the brightness distribution of the source that rotates with the sky, okay, as we see it from the Earth. So these 2 matrices are given in different frames. We have to translate one to the frame of the other if we want to compare them in the measurement equation, okay? So in the case of circular polarization fits, the rotation is trivial. It's a diagonal matrix. So the parallactic angle rotation is just a diagonal matrix which commutes with every other diagonal matrix. And that means that we can just plug it in wherever we want, okay? It's very easy to handle, okay? And actually, if you apply this, if you apply the parallactic angle rotation to, let's say, the brightness matrix and put it in the receiver frame from the sky frame, you see that the only difference between this matrix, which is in the sky frame, and this matrix that is in the receiver frame is just a phase, okay? It's very easy to handle programmatically. It's just a phase that you add to the I plus V and I minus V, so the parallel hand correlations, and a different phase that you add to the crosshand correlations. And these deltas are just the sum and the difference of parallactic angles at antennas A and B. Okay, so absolutely no problem in handling this. It's so easy that you usually forget that the matrices are given in different frames, okay? Because it's pretty automatic for VLBI. Okay, so examples of Jones matrices, which are, remember, are given in the receiver frame, okay, are, for instance, the gain matrix, okay, which you also saw yesterday, bandpass matrix, okay, all this has already been seen up in the previous days, and the polarization leakage. Here you have the D-terms that we were talking about in the first slide, okay, the D-terms that leak signal, that model the leak of signals from one polarization to the other. All of these are given in the receiver frame, okay? So remember, I insist, the Jones matrices are defined in and should be applied on the receiver frame. But for the case of circular fits, general case in VLBI, these two frames are related by a diagonal matrix. So indeed, it doesn't matter. It doesn't care much about the difference between receiver and sky frames. It's pretty automatic translation. Okay. So let's actually see what happens with these matrices, gain, bandpass, and polarization leakage, when we change from one frame to the other. Okay, from the sky frame into the receiver frame. It's just some matrix algebra. You know how to rewrite matrices in different frames. It's just multiplying by the matrix and its inverse at each side of the equation. Okay, and when you do the maths, okay, I will not do it now, but if you do the maths, you arrive to a very interesting conclusion, and this is the key of the question. Okay, this is the reason why we can calibrate polarimetry in interferometry, especially in VLBI. If you write the gain matrix in the sky frame, it looks exactly the same as the gain matrix in the receiver frame. Okay, so that means that if a given antenna phase is rotated 90 degrees in the sky frame, it also rotates 90 degrees in the receiver frame. Okay, so rotations look the same in the sky frame and in the receiver frame. It's just an absolute rotation what matters, but all changes of angles in one frame are exactly the same as in the other frame. But look what happens. Look at what happens with the leakage. It's like a little bit of magic here, because the leakage is sensitive to this rotation. Actually, the D-terms rotate twice as much as the rotation between the sky frame and the receiver frame. Okay, so the leakage does care about this rotation between the sky frame and the receiver frame. Okay, so gains are independent of parallactic angles, whereas D-terms do depend on parallactic angle, and actually depend quite a bit because they rotate twice as much. Okay, so in short, what happens is that since the D-terms depend on parallactic angle, we can use the parallactic angle variability, so the Earth rotation, basically, we can use the Earth rotation to decouple the instrumental polarization, which would rotate with the antenna frame or the receiver frame, to the effect coming from the intrinsic polarization of the source, which rotates with the sky. Okay, since both rotate in different frames, and the D-terms are sensitive to these rotations, then we can decouple them from the source structure polarization. Okay, this is the main reason why we can do polarimetry in VLBI. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to decouple ones from the others when we do decouple instrumental polarization from source polarization. So this is the mother of all polarimetry in interferometry. Okay, the fact that the D-terms do rotate with the frames. Okay. Now, we use this rotation in order to decouple, as I have said, the instrumental polarization from the source polarization. And the way it has been done classically in APES is via a program, a software called LPCAL, okay, which only works on APES, okay. At the moment in CASA, as far as I know, there is no official task to handle spatially resolved polarization calibrators. So I will talk about an alternative, which also works in CASA, but it's not official, called PolSolve. Okay, so let me now briefly tell you about the details of these two algorithms and how they handle the source structure. So yeah, the problem of VLBI polarimetry is basically the problem of a spatially resolved polarization calibrators. If the calibrators were point-like, were not resolved, there wouldn't be much trouble. Okay, the problem becomes trivial actually. But if you have some structure in your brightness distribution of the different Stokes parameters, then you're in trouble because the problem is not trivial anymore. Okay, at the moment there are several tools which have been developed, as you can see from the dates here, quite they are quite new. Okay, well, the oldest one is LPCAL, okay, which was developed in the 90s. But as you can see, there has been some work related to interferometric polarimetry in the last years. Okay, you have, for instance, GPCAL by John Ho, who I think may be in the call because he was registered as a participant. Okay, who has developed a wrapper. I think it's a Parseltongue wrapper or a diffmap wrapper that overcomes some limitations of LPCAL. And at the moment, as far as I know, I insist, maybe I'm mistaken, but as far as I know, the only tool based on CASA that would handle especially resolved polarization calibrators is PolSolve. Okay, all these softwares are based on inverse modeling, which is the clean style. Okay, where we retrieve the model directly from the data. Whereas you have also other alternatives with forward modeling, which is like the maximum entropy approach. Okay, where you start with a model and then you approach the model to the data. Okay. There are other alternatives which have nothing to do with inverse, neither inverse or forward modeling, which is the Markov chain Monte Carlo sampling, where you basically use the brute force approach of sampling the whole parameter space. Okay, and there are also two softwares, two very, very new softwares, okay, that can handle with this. So based on now just focusing on LPCAL and PolSolve, okay, I'm going to talk you about the two approaches, okay, used to model this structure contribution from the source polarization. Okay, so the one that was classically used with LPCAL is what we could call the slicing approach. Okay, with the slicing approach, what you do is basically to divide the source into what we call polarization subcomponents. Okay, so imagine that these are the clean components of a source. Okay, these are basically, you have two blobs. Okay, you have very close by deltas, clean deltas in one region, and then separated from them you have another set of deltas. So it is a clean model, okay, with no convolution with any beam. And then the way to model the polarization structure with LPCAL would be to divide the source, let's say, into two subcomponents, which we call S0 and S1. Sorry, my birds are getting crazy. And what we do is basically to assume, this is the basic assumption, and I would say the basic limitation of LPCAL. It assumes that each one of these subcomponents has a constant fractional polarization. So all these deltas are polarized exactly the same way within the subcomponent S0. And the same thing for these ones here, okay? So whereas the model visibility for the Stokes I is just the Fourier transform of the sum of all these components, the model visibilities for the Stokes Q and U separates these components by the subcomponents, okay? So it assumes that all the fractional polarization of each one of these deltas within each subcomponent is constant, okay? And then LPCAL, what it does is to fit the D terms, the antenna D terms, together with these values QS and US, okay? So it solves for the instrumental polarization and also solves for the constant fractional polarization that you have within each one of these subcomponents. So this is what we call the slicing approach, okay? We divide the source in pieces, and then we assume that each piece has a constant fractional polarization across it, okay? That's the LPCAL approach. It has some limitations, obviously, especially if you have a very rich polarization brightness distribution that is not exactly proportional to Stokes I within the subcomponent, then basically you can't model this using this approach, okay? And that would actually map into biases in your instrumental polarization, okay? So as I just said, okay, the antenna D terms and the subcomponent polarization are fitted together, okay, using this approach. There's another approach which was suggested by Bill Cotton a long time ago. It's a paper in year 93, which is the polarization, we could call it polarization self-calibration, where instead of dividing the source in slices, we basically let each clean component to has its own fractional polarization and EVPA, independent of the others. Okay, so we let everything free to the model of the Stokes Q and U. Okay, but instead of fitting, of course, that would be crazy to fit in your fitting exactly this. Well, with different polarization for each clean component, you would have a lot of free parameters, okay? And it would get crazy. So the approach we follow with this Paul self-cal is to fix the fractional polarization from your clean model. So you basically clean all Stokes parameters. You clean Stokes I, Q, U, and V, and then you fix the clean model in all Stokes parameters. You fix it, and you just fit for the D terms, okay? So you fix the source polarization that you have cleaned, okay? You hope that the source polarization will not depart much from the true source brightness distribution, and then you just fit for the D terms. This is basically the same as what we do with Stokes I when we perform hybrid imaging. So this is like self-calibration, but instead of solving for the gains, we solve for the D terms, okay? That's basically the same. So, okay, it's the same philosophy, okay? Fixing the source and then fit for the instrumental polarization. So the LPCAL algorithm only handles the slicing approach. So it only works by dividing the source in slices with assumed constant fractional polarization. And here you have the equation that is used by LPCAL, okay? So it's solving in the sky frame. So it rotates the D terms to the sky frame and then solves there, applying a linear approximation to the model. So even though you see that this is looks quite a messy equation, it's actually a linear model with all your fitting parameters, QS, US, and the D terms. So that means that you can perform just an ordinary least squares minimization. It's just a matrix inversion, and you are done, okay? It's a very straightforward, it doesn't seem to be, but it is actually a straightforward algorithm, okay? You solve the D terms directly with just a matrix inversion. It's very convenient, but it has the limitations that I have just told you a few minutes ago. The Paul-Solf algorithm is similar to LPCAL, okay, but there are some differences. The error function is, for instance, computed in the receiver frame. It should be mathematically equivalent, okay, but I think it's more elegant to work on the receiver frame to solve for the D terms. And what is more important, in my opinion, is that it uses a nonlinear model, okay? So it uses the full measurement equation, including the nonlinear effects that come from the instrumental polarization, okay? Which in cases of strong instrumental polarization and or high intrinsic source polarization, it can be helpful, okay? It can be more accurate than LPCAL, okay? How do these compare? Okay, so I made some comparisons with synthetic observations. I simulated an observation with the Event Horizon telescope using a subset of antennas, okay? Simulated a double source with a very high fractional polarization. The D terms were not that high, were of the order of less than 10%, okay? Which, well, I would say that it's the normal quantities that you can find, especially at high frequencies. And well, this was the simulated double source, okay? Which has a strong fractional polarization, which is different in each subcomponent. And if you fit the D terms with LPCAL in apes, this is the correlation between the true D terms and the D terms fitted by apes. These are the residuals. So it does a pretty good job, actually. LPCAL does a pretty good job, even though the polarization was so high. But if you now solve with Paul-Solf, you see that the residuals are lower, basically because of the nonlinear contribution to the model. Okay, so accounting for nonlinear effects actually helps, okay, and gives you more accurate solutions. Now, how do we use Paul-Solf? So how do we do VLBI polarimetry with CASA, basically? So first thing is to download the code. Okay, it's not an official task. Okay, it's an unofficial task. So you have to go to Launchpad, where the code is being maintained. Okay, at the moment. It's part of a toolbox for VLBI polarimetry. Actually, you don't find only Paul-Solf. You also find other tasks, like for instance Paul-Simulate, okay, which is used to generate VLBI simulations with CASA. Actually, the EVN simulations that I was showing in the first talk, okay, those EVN simulations were done with Paul-Simulate, okay, which I think is a very nice alternative to SimObserve for VLBI observations, because SimObserve has some limitations for VLBI which are overcome by Paul-Simulate. Okay, so you have Paul-Simulate, you have Paul-Solf, and you have CC-Extract, which is a way of helping Paul-Solf to divide the source into slices if you want to use the slicing approach as in LPCAL. Okay, so you have plenty of features there in CASA Poll tools. So after you have downloaded it, you just have to compile it and install. Okay, so it's as easy as running this command, okay, from the directory where you downloaded the code. Okay, so run the binary of Python that comes with CASA. Okay, of course, this only works with CASA 5.6, 5.7, so it will not work with CASA 6. Okay, and then once you have compiled the code, you just run build my tasks from the same directory, and then just update your init.py. Okay, so that the tasks will be available. Okay, so it's in principle it's easy. And if you load PollSolve into CASA, you'll see it's a normal CASA task. Okay, so I have marked the keyword that I consider more interesting for you: the visibility, the measurement set, basically. Spectral windows that you want to fit for, you can set all spectral windows together. You can also fit what I call a multi-IF fit, which allows you to solve for wideband, even for wideband observations. Okay, determines in wideband observation, accounting for Faraday rotation and all this fancy stuff. The field that you want to use as a calibrator source. Okay, the antenna mounts. This is particularly interesting. Okay, so when I developed this, CASA couldn't handle Nasmith mounts. Okay, so I couldn't generate ordinary CASA tables to be run by ApplyCal because it was impossible for CASA to calibrate this. Okay, so what I had to do is to develop an alternative approach, which is highly non-standard. Okay, this is highly non-standard, which runs ApplyCal by itself. Okay, so it has its own version of ApplyCal. Okay, which writes into the corrected column. So this generates a DTERM table, but please do not use this DTERM table with the official ApplyCal because it will not work. Okay, you have to run the local implementation of ApplyCal that comes with PollSolve. Okay, which applies it automatically. Okay, and corrects the corrected column. drsolve and dlsolve are also quite interesting keywords because it can be the case, there can be the case where you know the details of a subset of your antennas and you want to fix them. Okay, you don't need to solve for them. And these array of booleans allow you to fix the antennas for which you already know the details. Okay, and I think this is a pretty powerful feature which is not present in LPCal. You can also set here in DRDL those values that you already know, or also the starting values for the least squares minimization. Clean models is also a very important keyword. You have a lot of freedom here to set whatever model you like. Okay, you can set a set of clean components. You can set CASA images. You can set it to the model column of the measurement set. You have a lot of freedom to define the subcomponents of your source or the polarization brightness distribution of your source, depending on the approach that you want to use to fit for the polarimetry. So PollSolve actually is an array of booleans as well, who tells the software whether you want to fit for the source polarization together with the dterms, or if you want to fix the model polarization, the source polarization, and just fit for the dterms. Okay, so this basically tells PollSolve which approach to use: the slicing approach of LPCal or the polarization self-calibration approach. Okay, if you set it to false. Target field, this is a very important one because this, if you set it to a given source, it will correct the data for that source and save the polarization corrected visibilities into the corrected column. Okay, so this is what runs the local version of ApplyCal. Okay, if you don't set it to anything, you will not do anything. Actually, you will just compute the details, but they will not be applied to the data. And remember, you cannot apply it with the official ApplyCal because it, as far as I know, it doesn't handle the antenna mounts properly yet. Okay, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when I developed this, it was not the case. It also had options to plot things. Okay, to plot residual visibilities in phase or space, which I think can be quite useful if you want to check for the quality of the polarization calibration. And also, you can plot the parallactic angle coverage of the antennas to check whether there are antennas with poor parallactic angle coverage and so on. Here you have an example. Okay, this is not Sagittarius A. Okay, this is a simulation, a simulated source with a random brightness distribution. Okay, so please don't take this as the real source. Okay, this has nothing to do with Sagittarius A star. Okay, this is a simulation of a jet core or core jet structure at the coordinates of Sagittarius A. I just use the coordinates, nothing else. Okay, so I insist this is not real data. This is a simulation. where I assign different fractional polarizations for the 3 blobs that you see here, okay? So if you want to apply the slicing approach with PolSolve, okay, so if you want to solve it the same way as LPCal works, okay, the only thing you have to do is to first clean, of course, clean your source, then load it in the image viewer and define the regions where you want to fix the fractional polarization. This is just an example, okay? I want to slice it in 5 slices here and then 1 slice for this blob here. Okay, you can play with the slicing. You can change it as you like, okay? Then the viewer has an option, the CASA viewer has an option to save the regions, okay? To have the set of regions that you have defined here. Okay, I encourage you to use the DS9 region file, because if you use CASA region file, it's so silly that it doesn't have enough precision. Okay, the coordinates of the boxes that are saved in the CASA region file are not precise enough. So the astrometry of your boxes will be basically of milli-arcsecond scales, whereas here we are dealing with micro-arcsecond scales. So it's as silly as that, okay? So in DS9 region file in pixel format, you can save the coordinates of all these boxes, okay, into an ASCII file, which can be loaded in the task CC extract, okay? This is the other task, another task that comes with PolTools, okay? You just specify the model image that you have cleaned and the ASCII file that you saved, that you generated with the image viewer, okay? So these are where all the boxes are defined, okay? And you can make plot true, which will basically plot this, okay? We'll plot the clean image together with the clean components, the locations of the clean components, colorized by subcomponent, okay? So in each color, you basically have the clean components that fell into each one of these boxes, okay? So different colors for different boxes. So what PolSolve will do is to fit these clean components by assuming the same fractional polarization for the components that have the same colors, okay? So same polarization for the same color, okay? Different colors, different polarization. Okay, so CC extract is what it does, and it generates a set of ASCII files, okay, that then you can fill into PolSolve. So, okay, so this is the list of CC files generated by CC extract. I think that the best way to learn this is to do it, okay? So do it and you will see the details of all the files that are being generated and so on. Okay, this is the list of all files generated by CC extract, and this list is then given to PolSolve. Okay, so here you have the code to call PolSolve. Okay, these are the simulated data. These are the antenna mounts, okay, of the EHT antennas, alt-azimuth, Nasmith right, Nasmith left, and so on. Here you see the all CCs is the clean models. So this is the keyword that contains all these files generated by CC extract. So this is our set of clean models. We want to fit for all of them. So PolSolve is true for all the subcomponents. So we will fit for the polarization of all the subcomponents of the source. And the initial values will be unpolarized. Okay, so the initial fractional polarization will be 0 with a 0 EVPA. This is the starting values. Okay, linear approximation false. So I want to solve with using the full measurement equation. And then you just run this. Okay, you just run PolSolve. And this is the output that you get. Okay, so you get the estimates of the D terms, estimates of the polarization of each one of the subcomponents, and also a CASA calibration table, which is useless by now, okay, that has the D terms on it. If you would have set a target field to M87 or to Sagittarius A star or whatever target you have, then the corrected column would have been modified, okay, and you would have the calibrated data ready for cleaning, okay. This is the correlation between the true D terms and the PolSolve D terms obtained with this simulation. This is, I remember, it is 1 millimeter simulated data of a very rich polarization structure. Okay, so the correlation is not that bad. Notice that the D terms that I have simulated are huge. Okay, we are simulating D terms of the order of 40%. That's too much. Okay, no, you normally find D terms of the order of 10%, order of 40%. I just get wild, okay, in order to test the code to the limit, okay? And as you can see, even with a leakage of 40%, it handles very well. It works very well. If you want to use the polarization self-calibration approach, which I think is easier, okay, and I think it's even more powerful, but depending on the case, this is the code. As you can see, it's very simple. It's a very simple code. You just call tclean, okay? Beware of setting Stokes to I, Q, U, and V, because we need the model of the 4 Stokes parameters, okay? So we generate model images for all 4 Stokes parameters, and then we just call pole solve, okay? By setting clean models, you see clean models, instead of being a list now, is just a CASA model image. If you just give the CASA model image, okay, as an argument for clean models, pole solve will know, so will deduce that you want to use the polarization self-cal approach. Okay, so it will set so it will set pole solve to false. Will arrange everything so that you are applying the polarization self-calibration approach. So this is as easy as this. Okay, you iterate. This is the equivalent to hybrid imaging or self-calibration. Okay, we clean and then we run pole solve by setting the clean models to the last model cleaned. Okay. Of course, don't forget to set the target field to be the same source as the source that you are cleaning, okay? So what this will do is that tclean will use the corrected column, which will be updated each time you run pole solve, okay? So after you iterate a few times, here you see the correlation of true D-terms versus pole solve D-terms in the first iteration, second iteration, third, fourth, and fifth. You see how the D-terms are converging to the true values as we keep iterating. Okay, so this approach, I think it's pretty powerful, and as you can see, it's very easy to implement. Okay, in a CASA script. Okay, and last but not least, here is the source that I simulated. Okay, which was tricky. It was a tricky source if you want to use the LPCAL approach, because here in the crosses, in the yellow crosses, you have the peaks of polarization, which are shifted with respect to the peaks of a Stokes eye, which is shown in contours. Okay, so these shifts here are very difficult to handle if you use the slicing approach. Because if you use the slicing approach, you assume that you have a proportionality between a Stokes eye and the polarization brightness, okay? And this, as you can see, I have implemented the simulation in such a way that it's very, very hard to handle this, to handle this modeling with the slicing approach, okay? This is the source simulated. You can see the EVPAs are different. You have a nice rotation of EVPAs, very rich structure actually, okay? Very rich polarization structure. So do we still have some minutes? Because I would like to show you the code working live, if we still have time.
You have 11 minutes.
Oh, still, okay. So then we can have fun actually, live, running the code live. Okay, so, but first of all, let's give a summary. I hope I didn't run too fast. So instrumental polarization can be decoupled from source polarization thanks to the Earth rotation. I think this we are lucky enough that the D-terms rotate with the frames such that we can decouple one from the other. Okay, we need this polarization, this rotation, this Earth rotation to calibrate our data. Okay, this is not like normal self-calibration. Okay, this is more tricky than that. Polarization calibration in VLBI is especially tricky because there are structure effects from the calibrators. Okay, we have resolved polarization calibrators, and at the moment there are several approaches to account for these structure effects. Okay, one of them is a family of algorithms that would we could call inverse modeling. Okay, this is a la clean, let's say, where we retrieve the model from the data, and from this the only known option known from me, okay, maybe you know of another option, but as far as I know, the only known option for CASA would be pole solve. There are other options for H and diff map like LPCAL and GPCAL. There is also the option of doing forward modeling, where I would call a la MEM, okay, a la maximum entropy. The paradigmatic example would be EHT imaging, the set of libraries developed for the Event Horizon Telescope. And you also have MCMC methods, which I would call a la brute force, because they basically scan the whole parameter space of source structure and D-terms and antenna gains, everything together, which is being implemented at the moment that I know is in two softwares called THEMIS and DMC, also developed in the frame of the Event Horizon Telescope. So remember that pole solve is an unofficial CASA task, okay, which applies the calibration directly into the corrected data column. Okay, so please don't run ApplyCal after you have run pole solve, because otherwise you will lose your calibrated data. Okay, this was due to some CASA limitations that I found when handling antenna mounts. And remember, this is a highly non-standard procedure, so you have to take it into account in your scripts if you are going to use pole solve. Okay. several algorithmic options are available in PolSolve. You can either use subcomponent fitting or slicing, which is what is being used in LPCAL, or you can also use polarization self-calibration, okay, inspired by the works of Bill Cotton 93, which is also being used by GPCAL. You can also use this approach with GPCAL. And I showed you examples of both, okay? So what I would do now is, well, after showing the thanks to the sponsors slide and make all these things legal, okay, would be to jump to the terminal, okay, and then run PolSolve, run PolSolve live, okay? So I have here the simulated data. You can simulate these observations with PolSimulate, okay? Actually, if you download the code, you will see that there is a directory there called tests, okay, where you can actually download all the scripts that I have used to generate all the figures that you have seen in the talk, okay? So let's start CASA. Okay, and now I will recover the last call to PolSolve, so ticket PolSolve. Okay, and this was the last, these are the parameters in the last time that I run PolSolve. We can briefly go through them. Okay, this was the visibility, the measurement set, which was the simulated Sagittarius star image, which has nothing to do with reality. Okay, it's just a core jet, random core jet structure. These are the antenna mounts of the EHT antennas. Okay, feed rotation, you can also add if there is a constant feed rotation in any of the antennas, but it's not, no problem if you don't use it. It will just rotate the detents, but the observables will be the same. So I leave everything free, so I solve for all detents. I'm not fixing any detent of any antenna. Clean models is set to the clean model in the last self-calibration iteration. Okay, if you look at the scripts, you will see this is the image generated in the last self-calibration iteration. Okay, so I will load that model image into PolSolve and then just fit for the detents. Okay, this is how it is set now. Okay, it's to just fit for the detents. Okay, I'm gonna set the plotting to true. Okay, so in order to see, for instance, the parallactic angle coverage, so I set plot parang to true, it will make a plot of the parallactic angles. And also I will set plot residuals to true so that we can take a look at the residual visibilities in phasor space. And you will see how how good the fit would be, okay? So now if I just hit go, okay, it makes a lot of plots, and you see here it performs a least squares minimization, it converges, it tells us what are the D terms, okay? It also gives us some information about what it is doing, okay? So it's loading Stokes I, 42 components, loading Stokes Q, Stokes U, okay? Model is taken from the MS model column because what it does is to write the model image into the model column is like FT, is like the CASA task FT, okay? But it's locally implemented, okay? And then once it has it just solves, okay? Solves for the detents using the fixed model of the source brightness distribution that was in the CASA model image. Now, let me show you the plots, the figures that have been generated. The first one is the feed angle, not parallactic angle, but actually this is the feed angle, which accounts for not only the parallactic angle, but also the orientation of the feed with respect to the mount, okay? That's especially important for Nasmith mounts, okay? Which can add...
Ivan, you have 5 minutes.
Okay. Enough to show you the residuals, which is which are actually what I think are the most interesting results. So here you have, I'm moving this. Here you have the data, okay? So these are the cross correlation, right, left, and left, right. Cross correlation, cross hand correlations of all baselines related to ALMA in this EHT simulation, okay? Simulation of the EHT data. These are the data, and if you look here, it's called residuals, okay? Here you have the residuals after fitting for the D terms, okay? This would be the baselines related to ALMA. So as you can see, almost all the signal can be modeled after the D term calibration, okay? This would be for Apex. You can see, well, it works quite well. Look at all these rich structures here, which are being modeled quite satisfactorily. For Arizona, JCMT. Okay, you can see the noise simulation is actually quite good as well. The LMT is very sensitive. You see a lot of signal to noise ratio here. Most of the signal, if not all, is being modeled. Pico Veleta, okay, you see, it's fantastic. So the fit is quite good, okay, for the SMA. And last but not least, the South Pole, okay, where you also have for the South Pole is quite South Pole telescope is quite interesting because since it's in the South Pole, you don't have the parallactic angle doesn't vary with time; it's constant with time. It has its own peculiarities when calibrating for the details of the South Pole. And that would be it from my side.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Ivan, for this very, very nice talk. I will now, and also in time, we have still 3 minutes to spare, so there's 3 minutes more for people to ask questions. So I give the microphone to Mark, who's the question master.
Yeah, but before I start with the questions, I think Ivan invited me to comment on the month issue, so I'll do that. So since CASA 5.6, I think, actually all the common man types parallactic angle implementations are there. There's one that isn't there, and that's the XY mount that was used in some of the old NASA tracking stations that are now sometimes used for VLBI. And the only example of that that's still working, I think, is the Hobart telescope. So unless you have Hobart in your array, all the parallactic angle corrections should be there. Which I think means that we should talk and see how we can change this such that it works a little bit more transparently and even just produces a calibration table that CASA then simply can apply for the D terms. The reason why we didn't do that yet was because actually in the HT context, the parallactic angle correction was already applied to the data, which was a bit annoying because that doesn't fit very well into the CASA model. And also because in the HT context, the mount times weren't properly labeled in the data, and therefore you had to provide them manually.
Yeah. Exactly.
Anyway,
yeah.
So it didn't make sense at that point to spend some effort on that. But if there are people indeed interested in starting to use this for other arrays, I think it makes sense to spend a little bit of effort on that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because preemptively, there are plans to implement something similar as a proper CASA task in the official CASA distribution. George Mullenbrock, who is the CASA calibration guy, is very keen on doing that. Unfortunately, he doesn't really have very much time to work on that sort of projects. So it may still take some time before that happens. So you want to add anything to that, Mikael? Sorry, Ivan.
Yeah, well, that would be great actually to have an official task. Actually, yes, I would be very happy in order to compare what I'm getting here with. I mean, when using the full measurement equation, for instance, which is the way to do it. There are other features in PolSolve that may make it a little bit more singular as compared to other possible alternatives, which would be the possibility of using multiple calibrators in the same feed. That I think can be very interesting for VLBI because sometimes you have very poor parallatic angle coverage in some antenna, and if you would use more than one calibrator, then you would break that degeneracy, for instance. That I think that's especially important for the South Pole, for instance. It would be great to use more than one calibrator, so you scan more than one parallactic angle. And also the possibility of using wide field D-term fitting, accounting for Faraday rotation, for instance. I think that this can still make the program interesting for the people, even though we would have an official task. But in any case, I'm very keen to see that implemented in PolCal in CASA. I mean, the structure contribution.
So with that out of the way, maybe we should go to the questions. So the first question is from Paul. Can you, and if so, how could you measure linear polarization using VLBI?
Measure?
You mentioned only doing circular polarization.
No, I was talking about circular polarizers, which is the base that you use in your instrument to record the front wave of the source that comes from the sky. Okay, one thing is the basis that you use to record the data and correlate them, and another thing is the polarization information that you retrieve from the correlations, from the VLBI correlations. Okay, so in VLBI we usually use circular polarizers. Okay, this is what is usually done. And then from the cross correlations between the circular polarization signals arriving at each antenna, from this, you can derive linear polarization information. Actually, in this image is reconstructed from by applying the measurement equation to the visibility matrix of this simulated data. Okay, so this is linear polarization. So the red lines here are the EVPAs, and in blue you have the level of polarization intensity, linear polarization intensity. Okay, so you actually can retrieve information about linear polarization using circular feed receivers. There's no problem with it. Did I understand well the question, or?
I think you did. And I think you answered it excellent. So then the next question is from Jolt. He says, excellent talk. And then he goes on, uncalibrated Q and U images are often dominated by artifacts from D terms rather than represent the true image. I am surprised this approach works.
Me too. Well, I think that I don't think the convergence is guaranteed always, okay? And I think it would be interesting actually to study this systematically, okay? To increase and decrease the level of instrumental polarization, increase and decrease the intrinsic polarization of the source, and see in which situations, in which combinations the procedure works better and worse. This kind of analysis, to my knowledge, is not published yet, but I think it would be very interesting to look into that. So far, the few times I've applied it, though, it has worked pretty well, actually.
Okay. So then the next question is from Mikael. So the model is a Stokes I model, or all the IQ-UV models are required?
So it depends on which approach you want to use. So if you want to use the slicing approach, the LPCAL approach, okay, and divide the source in subcomponents and then fit the polarization of each subcomponent, then the model is only Stokes I. Okay, you just need Stokes I. Whereas if you want to use this polarization self-calibration approach, where you fix the source model and just fit for the instrumental polarization, then you need to have clean components in all 4 Stokes channels. So you need I, Q, U, and V.
I think that's clear. So the next question is from Carolina. Thanks, Ivan, very interesting. In PolSolve, I see that in the field parameter, there is a comment about the possibility of using multi-field.
Yes.
Is it possible to extract the D-terms from multiple sources?
Exactly. That's the idea. So it assumes that the D-terms are the same for all sources, which I think is a basic tenet of VLBI polarimetry, yeah. And then what it does is to combine data from all different calibrators. So there's absolutely no constraint on the locations of the calibrators. They can be spread around the whole sky, and it basically computes the geometry of the model at each independent direction. So there's absolutely no limits on this. And actually, I have made simulations of, for instance, geodesy-like observations, where you basically jump from one side of the sky to the other, and it works pretty well, actually. You gain a lot of signal-to-noise ratio in the details when you combine several calibrators, because you are not biased by structure effects of just one of them. You are kind of smearing all the systematics by combining different sources.
Okay, well, Carolina already said that the question was answered, but I think you added some useful information to that. And then the next question from the anonymous attendee is, if you have a point source, is it the same to use PolSolve and tclean?
You mean PolCal? Do you mean the CASA task? Or?
Well, I think that's what's meant instead of tclean, because indeed,
yeah, PolCal.
PolCal can indeed do solve for D terms for a point source.
Yeah, exactly. They would be the same. Yes.
So would there still be a reason to use PolSolve if your polarization calibrator is point-like, or would
well,
that be,
for instance, if you sorry, you have to. Sorry, it was the phone. So if you want to use several calibrators, for instance, if you have several point calibrators, then you would have an advantage in using PolSolve, because as far as I know, PolCal only handles one calibrator, whereas you could combine several calibrators. And also, there is another feature in PolSolve called multi-IF fit, which actually can be used to gain a lot of signal-to-noise ratio. You have many IFs on a given bandwidth, because it forces the Stokes parameters to be the same on all IFs, but provides a different D-term solution per IF. And that's I think it's the optimum way of handling multi-IF data. That feature, I think, is not implemented either in PolCal. So depending on the problem, you may prefer to use PolSolve or PolCal.
Okay, then I have to check whether there's any further questions in the MetaMost. Christina is asking if you could also comment on PolConvert.
Oh, wow. I will need another lecture for that. No, yeah, PolConvert was, is a software to actually convert visibilities, VLBI visibilities, taken in linear polarization basis. Okay, so it can basically, it's like PolSolve, but it's similar to PolSolve, but PolConvert deals with D-terms that are huge, are really huge. Okay, and handles this kind of what we call mixed polarization visibilities. Okay, which is a combination of circulars with linears and so on. So they are similar. Okay, they deal with the same thing, with basically VLBI polarimetry, but on different ways. Yeah, PolConvert is specialized for one particular problem, whereas PolSolve is more generic. Oh, do you hear me?
No.
Yeah, I thought I lost connection.
No, you are still there. Then there's a new question from Arjun. If you do PolSolve with self-cal for the already known polarization source, can you recover the known polarization characteristics?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question. What? If you, what?
If I suppose the question is, after you've done the PolSolve, how well do you recover the polarization characteristics of your simulated source?
Okay, yes, I understand now. So I thought the question was different. Okay, so if the question would have been what I thought it was, Okay, I thought you asked how do you self-calibrate after applying PolSolve. Okay, that's the way I understood it. So once you apply PolSolve, if you want to continue self-calibrating, you should be careful of applying the same gains to both polarization channels. Okay, so apply the T mode gain. Okay, because of several issues that we could discuss afterwards. So now the question was different. Was different from what I thought. So yeah, it depends on the quality of your deconvolution algorithm. Okay, so using T-clean for the particular simulation that I showed here, the reconstruction is very good. So it reflects very well what I was inputting into the simulation. Of course, it depends. It depends on how you clean, on which weighting you use. For instance, the masking depends on many things. Well, cleaning Stokes parameters is tricky because you can have negatives, okay, perfectly. You can have a negative Stokes Q and a Stokes U, okay? It's natural to have them. So you have to be especially careful when doing that with clean.
Mark, do you see other questions?
I don't see any other questions anymore.
Okay, then we have a 2-minute time to switch between speakers, which is perfect.
Yeah, a quick
There's an
remark.
announcement from the.
Can I make a quick remark, Kazi?
Yes.
I added the link that Ivan shared in his presentation to the wiki page, but I would ask him to check if that is the correct one, because I found 2 repositories for the PolSolve software.
Okay, so this is going to be addressed this morning, so then everything on the wiki will be clear and updated.
Yes, so people that want to check, it is already there. You can make.
Well, that's true. I forgot. One was used for testing.
So okay.
I should remove it. So,
So
the shortest one, the one that has more revisions, that's the correct one.
So the link, the code.launchpad link is the one you showed in your presentation. That's the correct one.
Yes, that's the correct one.
Okay, that's the one that
you will see. Actually, you will see 2 versions: the trunk and a branch. Okay, so just get the one that has 40-something revisions, not the one that has only 2.
Okay.
Okay, very good. So that's going to be updated before the data processing session at 11 UT, so that people can try it on their own.
Yeah, it's already on the wiki, so people can download it. But as Ivan said, make sure you get the branch with the most revisions. That is something that I cannot link to the wiki. That's something to keep in mind.
Okay, so then it's time to move to the next talk given by Michael Janssen from the MPIFR in Bonn. And it's going to be on millimeter VLBI with RPCard, the RPCard pipeline.
Yes, thank you, Kazi. I hope you can all hear me and see my screen. So I will just confirm I'll start right away, or is there a short break?
No, please start right away. There will be a break after your talk, well, after the questions to you.
Okay, good. Thank you. So yes, yeah, as Kazi said, I'll be talking about millimeter VLBI in CASA. And when I mean millimeter VLBI, I mean VLBI data taken at observing frequencies of about 22, 43 gigahertz and above. And what I thought I would do during this lecture is I will walk you through the typical VLBI calibration steps for millimeter VLBI, which are very similar to also centimeter VLBI and generic VLBI calibration steps, while highlighting for the different steps wherever something special comes up for high frequency observations. And I will do this with the RPCard pipeline, which I'll briefly introduce in a moment. And that the idea behind that is that this pipeline, so it's a CASA-based VLBI pipeline, you'll also find on the workshop wiki page with installation instructions and a brief introduction on how to run it, so that if you're at home with your own computer, you can actually get that pipeline, also start running it on your own data, and then exactly follow and see the same steps with the same diagnostic plots that I will show during this lecture for your own data set, which I hope will be useful. So here is a brief introduction to the software. So it's called RPCARD, which stands for the RAPL Pipeline for the Calibration of High Angular Resolution Data. And I guess, well, CASA is a new software package, but as you can see from this acronym, we're actually very true to the old astronomy traditions of using only horrible acronyms for our software packages. And if you want to know some more information about this pipeline, there are these two references, publications. One is by the EHT, because this is the software is actively used by the collaboration, and the pipeline itself is open source, so you can get it from this link. And now I just want to highlight just a few features of this software. So the first one is that it's actually running already on CASA-6, no longer on CASA-5, which was a discussion point in multiple places during this workshop. So the only issue with CASA-6 is that there's no good way yet to plot fringe width calibration tables. So for this pipeline, that's not a problem because it just uses its own plotting functions as a replacement for the plotcal task. Also, of course, you can keep your own CASA-5 installation and just have CASA-6 running on the side. The two can just run fine next to each other and won't interfere. Then the next bullet point is about the purpose or philosophy behind this pipeline. So just to clarify, in no way is this meant to be just some black box that you put your data in and you get your science ready results out right away. That's not how VLBI data works. As you all know, VLBI is a really complex data set, and every observation has different issues. And what really this pipeline is meant to do is to guide you and to help you and take away some of the tedious tasks and bookkeeping associated with VLBI, so that you can just focus on the important issues and identify where the real data issues are. So the way it works is you would normally get your data, just run a first pass with the default pipeline parameters of the pipelines, which will then produce many diagnostic plots that you can look at, decide if the calibration worked and where things go wrong. And then it's very easy to fine tune the parameters of the pipeline, setting SNR thresholds, flagging data, all this kind of stuff that you need to do to get the optimal calibration for your data, which you can then use to write your publication. And since you use the pipeline, it's very great for scientific reproducibility. And the last point here is that so in this talk, I'll talk about millimeter VLBI, and I'll use the pipeline for that. But really, the pipeline is meant to be a very generic thing. So it's actually meant to be used for any type of VLBI data there is, and it works should work just as well for millimeter VLBI as for low frequency centimeter VLBI data from the EVN, for example. So if you want to use the software, the installation instructions and some quick how-to guide, they're all on the workshop wiki page. You can use Singularity or Docker to have a containerized version, which is actually, I think, the best you can do for scientific reproducibility, or you can download it from source to always have an up-to-date version. Here, for example, my preferred method is always to use Singularity, and just with these two commands, you actually have the pipeline already up and running. So next is how to actually use the pipeline. There are actually just two things you need to be doing. So one is you need to get a set of input parameters from the pipeline, which is a command like this. So if you've installed the software in this location, this is the default location when you use a containerized version, you have an input template folder with input parameters in there, which you can just copy to a working directory. And then you only have to put everything you need, so all the data, metadata, in your working directory. Either copy or just soft links, both work. For example, you have the raw visibility data, fits IDR measurement format, untap tables, text files, flagging instructions, and some other files that you sometimes need, for example, for receiver temperatures, weather data, or source models. So a working directory typically would look like this. So if you run Picard, it should be smart enough to identify what to do with all these different types of files automatically, so you don't have to do anything. So we'll find these IDI files, and for example, this untap table, attach the untap table to the IDI files, and convert that to a measurement set, identify this one as flagging commands will flag the data for you. This one, for example, was the receiver temperature file. Here you have the input folder, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And this, for example, will be a source model for 3C84 that will be used, for example, for the fringe fitting. So there was also a question that came up earlier in the workshop. A good calibration strategy would be to first have a first pass through the data, calibrate everything, image your sources, and then redo the calibration with the source models applied actually on in a way on the fly for the calibration. And that's just done as easily here. If you just put it in a working directory, the pipeline will know how to use it and what to do with it. So this is the last configuration step is just setting the input parameters. In the input folders, you will have different text files for different types of input parameters. So typically, for a first run, if you don't want to fine-tune anything, is when the observation.inf file simply set the different sources and what they're used for. So we set which sources are science targets and what are the different calibrator sources, for example, for the instrumental phase and delay correction, bandpass, polarization calibration, and so on. And the only other file you typically have to set for default runs are the array type. Here, for example, for GMVA high frequency observations can also be VLBA, EVN, or other things. And then the list of your reference stations in order by priority. And then if you just want to run it, it's actually, you just have to tap this command. So this will tap to run the pipeline -p in the present working directory and to use the MPI speed up, for example, for fringe fitting and for all other tasks that are already internally run in parallel, in this case with specified to use 4 of your CPU cores. Now, this was a point that was made in many other presentations, but I think can never be made enough, is that you have to look at your data before calibration, after calibration, and it doesn't hurt to also look a few times at it during calibration while you already apply some solutions. So the pipeline will automatically generate plots like these. Those are made with the JPlotter program developed at Jive that also Benito talked about in one of his lectures. So these plots typically look like this. In this case, what is actually plotted is specific baseline here, Kitt Peak to Owens Valley. In the bottom panel, you see the amplitudes as a function of frequency over here. So you have the nice combined bandpass shape of the two stations on this baseline. And the top panel will be the phase. So here you nicely see that there is this uncalibrated data. So actually you can almost see what the delay should be by eye, the multiband delay should be by eye for this observation over here. Now, the point I want to make is that this is all nice, looking at the raw data, but often in millimeter VLBI you have a problem. And that is, you will see data as it is, a different baseline here on the right side. So the sources millimeter regime are often weaker, and you have a lot of noise and phase turbulence coming from the atmosphere. So if you just plot your raw data, it may look like this, which to the human eye looks just like noise. But really, do not panic. What you should do, typically millimeter VLBI, is to let the fringe fit code run on this data, and it will tell you if there's actually source signal here or not. So what you will do is you will make a note that there is this probably very low SNR data, run fringe fit on it, look at the solutions, see if they look reasonable, apply them to the data, and then look again. And hopefully after this was properly fringe fitted and also corrected for atmospheric phase turbulence in one way or the other, you'll be able to see the source. If not, you will get, fringe fit will actually tell you that maybe there's no high SNR detection there, and the data will be flagged automatically. Oh, sorry, what I forgot to mention is a little bit small here. So what's plotted here in 2 colors, actually red and green, so apologies to everyone who's colorblind, are the 2 parallel hand correlations, so the LL and RR correlations. Now, so now I'll go through really the calibration procedures step by step. So first starting with the amplitude calibration. So for reference, always in the top corner, you will find the corresponding step numbers as they are defined within the APRICOT pipeline. The first one is AC core that was already talked about also in other lectures to correct for sampler thresholds, for example, and correctly scale your autocorrelations to unity. So here from one observation plotted as a function of time, we have two polarizations and two spectral windows. So you see these four lines here, and everything in this regime looks good. And you have a few outlier points here, even though at a few percentage level, probably nothing horrible going on, but those would, for example, be data points that you would want to look at in detail and see what's going on there. The next one is something that's already in a way special to millimeter VLBI, which is a scalar bandpass. So often the normal way is to use a cross correlation to a complex bandpass. However, that's very much SNR limited. And so things can go wrong or you may not get any solutions at all. However, often you also get the autocorrelation data. And with those data, you will be able to actually get a very accurate correction for the bandpass shape, but you only get the amplitude corrections, no phase information, since these are autocorrelations. And this is something that is very good at millimeter VLBI, because at these high frequencies, you're not plagued by RFI. If you want to do scalar bandpass for centimeter VLBI, you should be really careful if there's no RFI left in the data. So next step is the flux density calibration. So that's using what's in your untapped table. So using station gains, DPFUs, gain curves, and system temperatures. And again, there's something special about millimeter VLBI here, or high frequency. There's a threshold is that where you should worry about is starting at maybe 20, 22 gigahertz. And that's the absorption of the source signal by the opacity coming from the atmosphere. So you get an e to the exponential e to the minus tau, where tau is the opacity along the line of sight, loss, absorption by the atmosphere of your signal that you need to correct for. Some millimeter observatories will give you system temperatures, which they often call effective system temperatures, which are already corrected for this. You get a system temperature that's already corrected for this opacity effect, and you don't have to do anything. But in many other cases, you actually do. So you have a high frequency observation, but you get a normal system temperature that's not corrected for the atmospheric opacity. And that typically scales like these. So these are the dominant terms. So you have a constant receiver temperature that enters, and you have a term that is essentially the sky temperature along the line of sight, which is also affected by this absorption. And what you actually can do is use this relation and use the system temperature measurements themselves to solve for the opacity. You only need to know receiver and the atmospheric temperature. And what the code does is it will estimate the receiver temperature by essentially looking at the system temperature as a function of air mass and extrapolating them, as shown here, to 0 air mass to get an estimate of the 0-point receiver temperature. The atmospheric temperature is solved for by the internal CASA atmospheric module, which is the ATM code, often used for ARMA observations, I think, where it will make use of the weather data provided for your station, so ambient temperature, humidity, and so on, to solve for this atmospheric temperature. And with those, then you will be able to get to solve for the opacity, and the pipeline will, for you, wherever necessary, get this opacity corrected system temperature. So now that was already the amplitude calibration, so not a whole lot is different. For the phase calibration, there are two things that you need to be aware of. The first is that the atmospheric coherence time can be very short. So you may need to correct for phases on very short timescales. The other is that the atmosphere is often so violent that often, unless you have two sources in the same beam, phase referencing is not really an option. So really also for your science targets, you will need to fringe fit them in order to be able to get fringe detections. And first I'll introduce two generic concepts that are implemented in the pipeline that help with these issues. The first one is also something that was discussed at some point of this workshop, is the exhaustive fringe search. So let's have a look at this plot on the left here, which is a depiction of some kind of a VLBI array. The green arrows, those represent fringe detections. The red lines, those are fringe non-detections. Let's say we want to have as a primary reference station A0. Problem is that, for example, A0, there's no fringe to any of these stations, C1 to C3. So the next step would be to pick a different reference station, in this case B0, first check that we get a fringe relation from A0 to B0, which is given here, and then see if maybe fringes are found from B0 to these C stations, which is still not the case. So we go to the next station, which in this case will be C0. So again, we have a fringe relation from C to B to A. So this is all good, and we can still use all the data while having them all nicely phase connected. And now, maybe just because stations capital C is very close to these smaller stations, C1 to C3, so you have a strong signal on a short baseline, suddenly fringes are found. So what the code will do, it will use this fringe relation over here, re-references using the known fringe relation between C0 and B0 from here to here, and then re-reference again to your primary reference station A0. So everything is nicely phase connected, what you need to have in your VLBI array. So in this way, it, as the name suggests, it exhaustively probes all the different baselines in the array in order to get the optimal calibration result. What I should note is that this is in principle equivalent to stacking baselines, which also a technique that some of you may be familiar with, which will be possible in the future with a generic fringe fit task. So once that is there, this in principle doesn't have to be done in that way anymore, and a more simple approach can be used. The next one is, as I said, excuse me, in problem with millimeter VLBI is the very short coherence time. So what you would want is to be able to correct for atmospheric phase variations on a very short time scales, right, within the coherence time. Problem is that often for many stations or many baselines, you do not have the sensitivity to do that. So you really need to integrate for longer in order to get enough source signal. So you need to find the perfect ratio, the perfect compromise between these two things. On the one hand, being able to fringe fit, for example, the data on short time scales to correct for atmospheric phase variations. On the other hand, have a long enough solution interval so that the signal is strong enough and you actually get enough detections. So I will not go into the details here because actually very complicated algorithm that is actually working here. But what the pipeline does in principle is it will take a range of solution intervals, guessing what roughly the coherence time will be, and fringe fit within that range in different trial, actually doing a trial and error analysis. It will ensure first that the median SNR on all baselines to the reference station is above a certain threshold, typically somewhere between 5 and 6. And then above that threshold, we'll do some further tuning, just trying to find the one solution interval where you get the maximum number of detections on all baselines combined. So that roughly solves that issue. But there is another issue. If you have, for example, a few stations, let's say 5 stations, you pick one of your reference station, and you have a high signal to noise ratio to 3 other stations. But there's a 4th station where really the signal, maybe it's very far away, so the signal is very weak. So you can, with the normal fringe fit, you will have to pick one solution interval, and either you pick a long one to get the detections and have enough SNR to that last station that's far away, or you pick a short one where you lose that station that's far away, but you're able to accurately correct for these short atmospheric phase variations and optimally correct all the other stations. What the pipeline does in that case, it will fringe fit the same scheme twice, once on the short solution interval to get the optimal calibration on the high SNR data, and once again on a longer time scale to get the detection to that last far away station. And we'll then take these two tables, interpolate them on a common grid, and apply that to the data so that you have really the optimal calibration, get the atmospheric phase corrections, and do not lose the far away station. As I said before, in the end, you will have also to fringe fit your science targets. But still, millimeter VLBI, first, you should only be concerned with your bright calibrator sources, which you will use to correct for all the instrumental effects. Once you have those corrected, only then you start tackling the science targets. So first talk about the instrumental corrections now using the calibrator sources. So the first thing that you often do is what some people call manual phase calibration. I call it the instrumental phase and delay calibration. It's essentially, if you have your data in multiple spectral windows shown here, which can have phase offsets or different delays between them that you need to take out. So here's one example where you see these different spectral windows and you have all these jumps in phases. But what you also see is the scatter really in this data points is actually much larger than the thermal noise. That scatter is coming from the just the atmospheric phase turbulence that is punishing you here for aggregating the data for a long time. So it's due to the scatter, it's actually difficult to figure out what exactly this jump should be. So before doing the instrumental calibration, actually the code will often do a first atmospheric phase stabilization. So we'll first fringe fit the data on a short segment, just correcting for phase variations, not applying any delay corrections, so that this phase scatter is taken out, which is shown here. So going from here to here after stabilizing the atmospheric phase, it's much easier to solve for these phase offsets. So this is done first as just a temporary calibration that will later on not be really applied to the data. It's just applied on the fly for the manual, for the instrumental phase and delay calibration. And the result is shown here. So here you have nicely the data with the atmospheric phase stabilization. And afterwards, by fringe fitting essentially the data on each spectral window individually, you are able to nicely align the data in phase. And what remains is just a residual bandpass effect, phase bandpass from these two stations. So once you have that, you just finalize the normal fringe fitting on your calibrator sources, and you're able to solve for the complex bandpass, which, for example, is shown here. So phase, top panel of the Python telescope, functional frequency for the two spectral windows plotted for RCP and LCP. In this case here, the gain amplitude is set to unity because this calibration was done relative to the scalar bandpass correction, which I was talking about earlier. So since we have a scalar bandpass, we only need to correct for the phases with the complex bandpass. So now we have essentially finished the work done on the calibrator sources. We've nicely taken out all the instrumental effects that are plaguing this observation. So now we can start tackling the typically weaker science targets. And this is done in typically a two-step approach. So first, you will fringe fit the science targets on a per scan basis, integrating for as long as you can, where you think that still the delays and rates are relatively stable, which are entire scan durations. And that you have to do with initially relatively wide search windows for the delays and rates, because you do not really know where the true signal lies. But that will tell you initially if you have a source detected on a specific baseline or not. If you're not able to detect a source with this first initial fringe fit over a long scan duration, often there's not a lot you can do to recover the data. Maybe that just telescope wasn't operating correctly, or you simply do not have enough signal to noise. So after doing that, you would run a second fringe fit stage with smaller search windows. We just try to find correct for the residual variations from the atmosphere. So that will solve for phase turbulence introduced by the troposphere and any residual delay variations that you may have over the scan. I should note that there is also phase referencing mode possible with the pipeline for centimeter observations, but as I said, in most cases, it will not really help you for millimeter VLBI. So these are again like typical plots that are produced by the pipeline. These are the two plots from these two-step approach for fringe fitting the science targets. So the left one is from the per scan fringe fitting approach, where you see if you can detect the source. So this is from the, which one is this? Hancock, I think, telescope. The lines are between the different scans in the observation. And here the bottom panel, so we have for the two receivers, right, RCP and LCP. Here in the bottom panel, these are right, the delays. And as you see, the delay changing as a function over the experiment. Here are the per scan phase solutions, which are not really that useful. And these here are the rates of the experiment. So this is the first step, and then this on the right hand side, this is a refined step on the optimized, some short data segmentation time, some optimized solution interval for the fringe fit code to solve for residual effects. So you see that there are many more data points here, because typically here maybe it was the data within each scan was fringe fitted maybe on a 30 or something second cadence. So first, these are again residual delay variations. So the first thing to note is that if everything works fine and delay is stable, these should be close to 0, right? And that's shown here in the middle of the experiment. But you do see that things are different at the end and at the beginning of the experiment, which is not that surprising, because that's typically when the telescope is observing at a low elevation. So we're looking through a lot of atmosphere, a lot of air mass, and things can change due to that within a scan. And that's what you see, for example, how there's still this residual variation of the delay within a scan. The next one, these are the phase solutions. We're actually correcting for the phase turbulence, the rapid phase variations introduced by the scan. And here you see a similar trend. At the beginning and at the end of the observation, the phase scatter is relatively large. And in the middle, because less air mass, less phase, less air mass, and less phase turbulence is introduced by the atmosphere. So here the phases look more coherent already. And that was actually all I wanted to tell you about this. And of course, want to thank the sponsors of RadioNet and Jumping Jive. And thanks everyone for your attention.
Thank you very much, Michael, for this very nice talk about the RPCard pipeline and CASA-VLBI. So there will be some data processing sessions today, so that people may try to use it themselves. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your pipeline itself, because you spoke in various steps. So you can use the pipeline also for just a number of steps, right? You don't need to go through all of them.
Right, I have a few backup slides. So this is, for example, yes, this is relevant, I think. So this will be the default way to use the pipeline if you just want to let it run with your data and do everything. And you can get the help to see actually what's possible. And here I have one example where I select only specific types of steps. For example, what's always nice, as I said, to look at your data. And if you, for example, have already a previous calibration applied, and you want to go back and just look and just get plots of the raw data, you would run the pipeline like this. So the -p is the same, also the -n is the same. So this means run the present working directory, use, in this case, just 2 CPU cores. And if you just want to use specific steps, in this case, you would specify, sorry, if you want to use specific steps, you would specify the -q parameter and then select the steps you want to run. In this case, H and K. So H will clear any previous calibration, and step K will plot just make the visibility plots. And just for reference, these are the typical steps in which I didn't have the time to go into much detail. So these are all the backup slides, apologies for that. But these are the typical steps that you would see when running RPCard. So a few steps, in this case, A to G, that are run before doing any calibration. Those, for example, loading source models and flagging the data. Then you have the numbered steps. Those are the calibration steps where calibration tables are created. And then these are these H and so on, continuing with letters. H to L in this case are the post-calibration steps. So these are, for example, I said here, clearing any previous calibration, applying the data, and then this case was step K, creating diagnostic plots.
Okay, yeah, this is something very useful to know, I think, for people, because if they just would like to do one step or redo one of the steps, then they know that this is easily done with the pipeline. So actually, you still have 15 minutes. I don't know if you had something else in mind. Or
I was fast.
very fast.
Let's see. I could maybe following Ivan. I could show like how to run. I haven't prepared anything, so I hope it works. But I could just show you how to run the pipeline. So this will be my typical working and testing directory. So it actually looks like this. There's a whole lot of stuff in here, most of which are from some test runs. But it's not really a problem. Just to just highlight, so most of these the pipeline will ignore all of these files. It will, but for example, it will recognize this as link to the raw IDI data, this as where to find the untap tables, and yes, and some other files that I cannot find in this mess right now. If I run the pipeline, in this case, so most of the times I specified something like this. We use 4 CPU cores. If you do not specify this, it will, there's a default MPI configuration file that you can set up, which by default will use all your cores, which is what happens when you, which is what will be used when you don't specify -n. So just run it like this. So I just run this on my very slow laptop, which just has 4 cores. So you see that CASA is started in MPI mode. Sorry, here this is CASA 6 introduction. It started 5 times. So there's one master master node from CASA and then 4 worker nodes that actually do the processing. And this is what you will see when running the pipeline. So you get introduced. It will tell you a few things. For example, speaking about how you can configure the pipeline, there are actually about 250 parameters that you can set if you want. But in most cases, you really don't. And many of these parameters are just parameters where how the diagnostics are created and things like that. They're in the end just a handful of parameters that you really have to set in the end, unless you have a really, really complicated VLBI observations, then you may need to fine tune a little bit more. And here, for example, it will tell you a little bit how it identifies some of the input data. Since I have a very messy working directory, for example, it tells you, okay, since this has a fits extension, maybe this was, maybe you've used .fits as extension for your IDI file, and it was checked, but it wasn't really fits IDI file, so it will be skipped. So that's the way that the pipeline goes through the working directory, trying to understand which files you actually wanted to use for your calibration. Really, you should really always have a clean working directory so you don't, all this mess will disappear. Also here it tells, for example, what often done in this. It checked, okay, there's already system temperature attached to the first IDI file, so it doesn't need to do anything with the untap tables. Also, weather table is there. Measurement set was there. And there are also different flag versions, which are kept very simple in this pipeline. So they're actually only just 2. There's the default initial flag version, which corresponds to the unflagged data. And then there's another flag version, which is the data just before you run apply cal. So that data will have your a priori flags applied, but not any flags applied from the calibration tables where you have missed fringe fit solutions, for example, that will flag data. And by default, if you run the pipeline, it will restore to this flag version, always to the initial flag version. And again, with the simple command line arguments, you can instead tell us to switch to the other flag version. Right, and yeah, it's simple as this. It will, maybe you can just run now. You can see it here at the AC core step. Maybe the only other thing I can show is that by default, every time you run the pipeline, a diagnostic folder is created, which shows you, which creates all the diagnostics that you want to look at. If I open just one of them, I hope it's not empty. It typically looks like this. So you have, again, stored the command line arguments that you've used. It has the CASA log files and then some, if I go to opacity correction, okay, for example, then you can see, right, files like this, which I've also shown during the lecture. So that's typically how the pipeline works and where you want to look at the output. Yeah, I think that's all really I wanted to show. Thanks, Kazi.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. So now we go to the questions. Mark, over to you.
Indeed. Not many questions. So this might be done quickly, but The first question is from Pires. Would RPCAR work for big bandwidth observations in centimeters?
Sorry, I had to kill briefly kill the pipeline. Otherwise, my CPU, my fan will go nuts on the laptop. Wide bandwidth. So does that
Big
mean
bandwidth is 10 gigahertz?
10 gigahertz? Well, it's in principle, yes. I'm trying to understand if this is a question about computational limitations or about specifics of fringe fit, if it can deal with these wide bandwidth. So I'll just address both. So first, about specific limitations for wide bandwidth and fringe fitting. Maybe Des can comment later, but I think that's in principle possible. And if not, I think ongoing developments are happening right now to be able to exactly do that and be able to nicely fringe fit through these very wide bandwidth at lower frequencies. Because I actually remember that I'm testing some new code that Des has written at this very moment. The other part about the computational limitations, in principle, yes. I mean, it always depends on the machine. And for this wide bandwidth, you need to have enough memory. What I can tell you is that for EHT data, which is recorded right now with 64 gigabits per second, so we also have a lot of data coming in there. It handles this type of data just fine. So I'm not sure if Des is here or if he wants to comment on wide bandwidth observation centimeter.
I'm here, and it's an ongoing area of research. We're working with the VGOS people because they have a wideband receiver. We were hoping to use the brand receiver, and we are still looking forward to one day being able to use the brand receiver to test wideband data. But the simple answer is that the fringe fitter mostly seems to work pretty well without doing anything spectacularly different with a wideband. The wider the band gets, the wider the fractional bandwidth, the more important it becomes to handle the dispersive term introduced by the ionosphere. But that's been implemented. You can do that. So if you're interested, then I invite you to try it and tell me if there's something you don't like, and if there's a data set where you think the performance is unsatisfactory, we'd be glad to see if we can make it better.
So Pires says, indeed, that the intended application is VGOS. Then the next question is from Mikael Liskov. Is there any option for using RPCAR for low frequencies like 1.6 gigahertz? So I suspect he's asking, is it possible? And if so, what should I do to tell it to do the right thing?
Right, yes, yeah, that's possible. The easiest way is, let me just input. Oh no, this is a horrible one, sorry. Go to the here. So the only thing you will have to set is actually this array type. So if you set that one to EVN, if it's EVN observation, then you're essentially good to go. I can quickly show, so here, the array specific steps I said is in this main card they're defined here. Oops. So if you want to have a look what's actually happening, this is here. So this is actually the part, and the only part in the code which really differentiates at the code level, not at the parameter level, between the different types of observations. So there's one for a generic array, which is does most tasks, some specifics for EHT and high frequency. For example, here's the distinction between VLBI high and low. The only difference is the additional opacity correction. and you have low frequency data. So I guess it's either VLBA or EVN. In this case, the difference being between those two is just that for VLBA, I run the AC core task. For EVN, I don't. So EVN, I immediately start here. And as you see, by default, it does a scalar bandpass, which again, if you have RFI in your autocorrelations which are not flagged, you shouldn't do this. But in general, it's if there's no unflagged RFI, it's still, I think, better to do a scalar bandpass than a complex bandpass. This is why it's still in there. But there's a separate input parameter also when you actually run it in your working directory to just disable the bandpass there. I hope that answers the question. So yes, in principle, 1.6 gigahertz should be no problem at all.
Sorry, I was typing up the answer for that one. A new question has arrived from June. In your pipeline, if you implement heuristics for additional flagging.
Right.
I think the question is if you have plans to do that, or what have you implemented and what are you planning to add?
Right. So with the flagging, what is in there are some what I would call experimental flagging options, which are actually disabled by default. So these are here. So what they do, so there's some pre-calibration steps. So what they do is essentially just looking at the autocorrelations and trying to identify problems there. They've worked very well to identify issues with the EHT data. But I think for most other arrays, there are most definitely better options to do the flagging. So one was the AO flagger that was mentioned. The other one was just, I think it was something that Javier mentioned. I think there's also the flag data task maybe. There's also the option to do some automatic heuristics to flag RFI, for example. So since those options are there and are actively being developed and pursued, I will probably not implement something special just for this pipeline. What instead I will probably do in the future is simply make use of those flagging algorithms that are already in place and can be used for CASA just as part of this pipeline. Right, since really you don't have to do everything with this pipeline, what I may just advertise users when they run this, if they want to use these packages, right, and they have a measurement set, just run the flagging with those algorithms first, and then just run the pipeline afterwards. Sorry for the long answers, Mark, that you have to type out now.
Yeah, while Mark is typing, I'm going to take liberty to ask a question. So do you now also do full polarization calibration?
Right. So that was something that I've skipped actually here in this presentation. I think there were some, let's see in the backup slides, right? So that was a slide I once had in there. So there are options to do polarization calibration with the common CASA framework. And here I'm referring back also to Ivan's lecture. So the first point I want to make is that when you fringe fit your data, you reference everything to, sorry, one step back. When you fringe fit your data independently for RCP and LCP, and you pick one reference station, what you will end up with is one residual RL, so cross-hand correlation phase and delay offset, introduced by your reference station. So that will be, if you're consistent with your reference station across the array, and I can guarantee that this pipeline does that, you will end up with, for all stations, all data, one constant RL or LR, crosshand visibility, phase, and delay offset. And there is a common CASA task. I think it's GenCal or GenCal. I always mix them up. It is in the pipeline. I remember coding it, which takes this out. And I've tested it, and that works just fine. Problems are the leakages, right, the D terms, and that's basically what Ivan was talking about. So there's a very simple task in CASA, PolCal, but mostly for VLBI data will probably not be good enough. So what you will have to do is probably the best way if you want to do everything in CASA is to get the PolSolve package from Ivan and get the solutions from there. After the fact. And in most cases, you will have to anyway do the leakage or D-term calibration after the fact, after you've already calibrated the data, since you need to have an image, Stokes eye image of your source. In the future, come back to discussion from Ivan and Mark, likely once PolSolve is a proper CASA task, then it will just be, I would most likely just make it one step of this pipeline.
So if there are no other questions in between, I'll ask another one, since we've also handled imaging. So does the RPCard pipeline make some also some images for people to check, some images with maybe just standard parameters in T-Clean?
There is an option to do that, yes. Go back. So there are, as part of these pipelines, they're called the interactive utilities here. What's in there is a very simple imager, which is here. So it's not part of the default run of RPCard, which really does mainly calibration. But you can, after you've calibrated your data, just give it a first pass with the default parameters through this imager. What this imager will do, it will, as you said, it will actually run T-Clean, and as specified, it can do a few rounds of amplitude and self-calibration iteratively with T-Clean. So if users want to do this, they can get a first initial simple image with this method over here. But I think in general, imaging is a relatively complex thing. And in my experience, every user will want to do their own specific use their own specific method of self-calibration and imaging, maybe use diffmap instead of T-Clean. So I didn't want to advertise this too much, but it is there if people want to use it.
All right, okay. Mark, do you see any other questions coming in?
There's one question on the MetaMost channel that I skipped, and it's a question from Mustafa, who doesn't quite understand where to put the data.
Ah, right. Yes. So let me go back.
But maybe this needs some help during the data reduction.
Okay, so is this, Mark, is this a generic question or some very specific issue?
I don't know.
Okay, I'll just take this briefly as a generic question and just clarify what I meant in this slide. So the idea of how to run the pipeline is that somewhere right on your system you have some working directory, so clean directory where you want to process your data. So the first thing to do is go to that directory and then copy a version of the input files. So from wherever the pipeline was installed, you get the input template and copy this as an input folder in that working directory. And then just dump, it's as simple as just dumping everything you have in that working directory. So let's say you have your FITS IDI files. So in this case, there's just one, but for EVN, let's say you have 10. You would just either copy them or just create soft links to them if you don't want to duplicate your IDI files to this working directory. And the same goes for all the metadata. So in most cases, you may have one flag file that you can just put there, and one untap table that you can also put there. And yeah, and that's actually all. If you then run the pipeline here, it will identify all the IDI files, attach the untap table, and concatenate the IDI files and make a measurement set out of it, which will then be used in the subsequent processing.
Mark, do you see new questions coming in, or is it time for the break?
I think it is time for the break.
All right. So I would like to thank both our speakers, Ivan and Michael. This morning, it was both really, really nice talks. Thank you for the questions that people sent in. And well, you can later on this morning, afternoon, you can practice with both these packages. And then we go now to the break until.
Can I make a quick logistical announcement? I just want to remind the people that the walk is still open. You can add your steps or activity there until we start the quiz essentially today. So that is at 16:30 UT. If you want to upload pictures as well, images of what you've been doing this week, please do so. There is a link to the drive in the Zero general announcements channel. And you can also, if you do not have access to the Walk platform, there is a channel, that is a new channel, Zero, that has the Walk information, but you need to join that first before you see it. So if you don't see the channel that is related to the Walk on the Mattermost platform, go to the More button below the channels and you will find a channel there to join and add your stuff there. So that's it for me. And I think we can go to the break now. We have a 30-minute break. So we start again at the hour, noon CET or 11 UT. See you all there. Bye-bye.